Following the setbacks on his travel ban and healthcare reform, US President Donald Trump signed an executive order aimed at reversing his predecessor's efforts to address climate change. What does the new president hope to achieve this time? And why are his policy initiatives proving so ineffective so far?
As your president, I'm going to do everything I can to unleash the power of the American spirit and to put our great people back to work. This is our mantra: buy American and hire American.
2 months have passed since Trump took office, and his economic plan seems to be bearing some fruit, with many transnational companies pledging to create American jobs and benefit American workers. Is Trump realizing his campaign promise to voters? And how will his economic policy influence globalization and free trade? On April 6th and 7th, Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet with President Trump in the US. Their conversation is likely to focus on stabilizing bilateral economic and trade relations. What developments can we expect from the leaders of the world's two biggest economies? China's internet finance began growing explosively around 5 years ago. Now the investment environment is becoming calmer and more mature. What impact does it have in the real economy, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises? What regulations are needed to prevent abuses and better promote China's financial reform?
More than 2 months have passed since Donald Trump took office. Though still a source of some uncertainty, Trump's economic thinking is showing its influence both in the United States and around the world. To examine the emergence of Trump's economic plan and its effect on Sino-US economic relations, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Zhang Jianping, Director General at Center for Regional Cooperation, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, in the first half of the show. In the second half, when we come back, I'll talk to Gregory D. Gibb, Co-Chairman and CEO of Shanghai Lujiazui International Financial Asset Exchange Corporation Limited, to share his insight with us. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to the show, Mr. Zhang. So far, what do you think of President Trump's plan to reindustrialize the U.S. economy and to bring jobs back?
Actually, not only Trump does this. Actually, Obama they try to do like this. But you know that for the U.S. now, as the biggest economy in the world, all of those costs are also higher and higher. So it's not easy to attract those industrial sectors back to the United States. So that's why actually Trump administration has a new plan, that is he wants to cut tax in the United States. I think that would be the possible policy instrument to attract those manufacturing sectors back to the United States. But don't forget that actually in the U.S. Nowadays their service sectors already make more than 80% GDP, maybe 85% of their GDP. Also financial sectors, consulting sectors, credit sectors, business sectors, all of those sectors are dominating US economy. So at this background, it's not easy for those people, to do, to have some of jobs in manufacturing sectors, unless, in the United States they can formulate a new circumstances can attract those manufacturing sectors.
The counter-argument, Mr. Zhang, is that the jobs are not an issue because with the widespread use of robots and artificial intelligence, labor force in its traditional sense will no longer be the top concern that gets in the way of improving the U.S. economic shape. What do you think of this counter-argument?
Yeah. I think that for those robots, those auto machines, actually they are mainly applied in those high-tech sectors or high-value-added manufacturing sectors. But in service sectors are still relying on human resources. Meanwhile, even if for some of high-tech sectors, for example, for mobile products, it's not easy to use robots because mobile products need to be upgraded year by year. linear. But robots and auto machines, they can't, chase up this type of pace. So that's why, for, Apple products and other, mobile products, every year in China, those factories can, do new version of, mobile one by one. So that bill seriously relying on production line, seriously relying on, workers. So in this regard, I don't think that for those, end of production lines could be back to the United States. Otherwise, that every year we cannot see the new version of mobile products. That's just those production line may be moved to India, maybe to other economies. But for the United States, maybe, in mobile products, actually they have some of high value added, semi products or parts. Maybe some of them can back to the United States.
He vows to cut tax, and yet he has failed to replace Obamacare with his own health care act due to opposition from the Congress. Now, taking the infrastructure construction itself as an example, it needs at least $8 trillion US. Where does the fund come from?
Yeah, I think this is a headache problem. Also, we have no clear idea on this.
Initially, he wants to secure enough investment from the cancellation of Obamacare, but it was objected. Now, do you think investment from China could be a major source of investment, because the upcoming summit in Florida between President Trump and President Xi Jinping may aim to fix this problem in time?
I think that's a complicated issue. You know that actually Trump administration already claimed that they will buy America, and they will use those equipment and products made in the United States. Also, in the U.S., they have some of rules and regulations on, infrastructure public bidding. That means in the United States, in case they have their infrastructure, projects, actually they will, have those qualified, companies or corporations to have bidding process in the United States. But between China and the U.S., actually we have no, governmental procurement agreement. Mm-hmm. So that means for China's infrastructure corporation, there will be some of policy, barriers when they want to join projects in the United States. But on the other hand, I think that some of equipment provider, for example, for subway system and containers, in case that they want to export their project to the United States. Nowadays in Boston and in Chicago, they already have those products made in China. So I think that right now we can imagine that some of Chinese corporations maybe have opportunities, but if we want to be involved in deeply, that means we have to negotiate with the United States.
At this moment, capital control has been seriously tightened by the Chinese authorities. Will President Trump complain to his Chinese counterpart in Florida about the capital account because he badly needs Chinese investment?
I think that on this aspect, the U.S. can understand, this type of situation in China, because China's economy is in progress from, in the past, we were belonging to a planned economies. Now we are transferred to, market economy. Also, RMB internationalization is still in progress. China's capital account cannot be opened rapidly because domestic, our stock market and debt market not so matured. We need to have a series of new rules and regulations.
In other words, these regulations are imposed to tighten the grip on capital account, aims to ensure that we would not have systematic financial risks and to ensure that we will not have hard landing. So we enter the new normal of the economy.
I think that we are facing with a series of risks, both from macroeconomic level and the financial system. So that's why in China we know that there are so lot of risks. We have to do our reform and opening up step by step. There will be a progress, especially for financial sectors opening up. Recently, actually at the end of last year, China's authority already promoted a further step, opening up in financial sectors. For example, they will allow those investors from other countries to buy stocks of domestic banks. Also, we will gradually expanded our, opened our debt markets, allow those international investors can buy those bond products in financial products in China's bond market. But given that China's stock market still need to have time, so I think that that will take for China. We will have a progress on that.
What do you think of the frustrations that President Trump is facing, given the general opposition? For example, his ban on Muslims from 7 countries have been blocked by judges, and this time around, the Healthcare Act has been pulled from the floor of the House of Representatives, even due to strong opposition from within the Republicans. Now, what do you make of his ability to survive the first year of presidency? Everybody is watching out for the first 100 days of his presidency, but so far, how do you rate his performance?
Oh, yes. I think you're right. Actually, as a president or as a new administration, actually, the U.S. is the biggest economy in the world. Also, is one of the biggest, most complicated economy in the world. That means every policy tools, when you promote this tool, you have to consider a comprehensive implication on social and economic development. I don't think Trump administration has a very careful and comprehensive evaluation on their health care policy. That's why even if within a Republican Party they cannot make consensus. So I'm afraid that next step, given that they already have so lot of difficulties and barriers, I think next step when they consider the new policies, not only domestic policy but also their international policies, they have to have a very detailed study, very detailed evaluation in order to make those policies becomes more practical and feasible.
The failure to repeal and replace Obamacare is indeed a devastating setback for the Donald Trump presidency. Now, he currently suffers the worst approval rating compared with his predecessors, ranging from Jimmy Carter, Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and Obama.
Yeah.
He is the lowest approval rating.
Yeah.
What does that mean for his electorate? I mean, a few days ago in the Broad Forum for Asia, I was told that no matter what he says or does, there's always a 37% diehard support for him. Now, when the Obamacare fails to be blocked by this newly elected president, what will happen to the 37% diehard supporters of the Trump presidency?
Yeah, I think this is a very bad signal. Also, that
does that mean a trade war with external competitors? Because in times of crisis, politicians tend not only to protectionism but also turn to external threats to even launch or stage a war to divert public attention.
I'm afraid that. Given that actually Trump has already did a lot in the past 2 months, that means I do believe that they will do something on international trade or currency issues. But he already approved, several cases, including, actually home alliances products from China has a very, punishing, tariff, something like that. I'm afraid that in the future there will be more.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the first part of our program with Mr. Zhang Jianping. We've been discussing the economic policy of President Trump and the setbacks he has suffered in the first 2 months of his presidency. We'll be back after a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. As a pioneer in China's internet finance industry and an experienced observer of the Chinese market, Gregory Gibb has an extensive understanding of Chinese internet finance as well as the Chinese economy in the global context. I had an exclusive interview with Mr. Gibb, co-chairman and CEO of Shanghai Lujiazui International Financial Asset Exchange Corporation Limited, to share his insight with us. Welcome to Dialogue, sir. How dangerous is the rising tide of protectionism the world over?
I would say anytime we talk about protectionism, it's a danger. And that's simply because if we look at the last 30 years for global trade and FDI, it is a tide that has brought many boats up. And I think if we pull back from that at all, it's not a good thing. Now, I also personally believe that pragmatism will win. You will have lots of noise, you will have blustering, but at the end of the day, the complexity of the economies that we face today, whether it's China, the United States, or anywhere else in the world, the number of connection points has become so vast that I think that reason will prevail, that many companies using their own channels will, whether it's the United States or other parts of the world who are moving towards more protectionist measures, will be encouraged heavily to pull back from anything that gets too close to the cliff.
President Obama said in the second presidential debate that unless and until China is following up the rules, it will be the adversary of the United States. Now, having said this, one important part of TPP negotiations has been the subsidy for SOEs. And I've been doing homework about the online financing, and that's your domain. And you said you should manage to use online financing to benefit the small and medium-sized enterprises. Do you think this part of the Chinese economy is likely to be the major driving force for the sustainability of the Chinese economy?
In short, absolutely yes. I mean, I don't think it's a new idea if we look at the last 10 years to say that 70–80% of all new jobs that were created in China were created from private enterprises, from smaller enterprises, from new service industries. And so I think the biggest, and I think anybody in China who's forming policy would agree that the primary thing that needs to be done is to get the right amount of resource into the right sectors so that we're creating new jobs in China, so that we're increasing productivity, so that we're promoting service, so that we're promoting domestic consumption, so that we're leveraging the infrastructure that's been built. And it is, the transition of the economy which is laid out in China's plans. So I think that the role of internet finance is to try and accelerate or to make more efficient that reallocation of resource towards these sectors which create the most jobs.
What are the universal virtues of online financing, given so many traps, pitfalls, and deceptions?
Yep. I mean, when you get into something new and a new industry is built, there's a lot of people who will jump onto it, use the name, and do totally something different. And I think what internet finance is about, or now it's called fintech, it's been kind of rebranded, is it's about creating transparency for the participants in a transaction. It's about lowering the cost. It's about being able to move resources in a more efficient way. And it's about providing more information for good decisions. And so I think what we're seeing in China, I do believe, by the way, fintech, globally speaking, but in China, has just started and is accelerating very fast. The speed of which the cloud, artificial intelligence, big data will allow us to make better decisions, whether you're an investor or a borrower, are going to accelerate dramatically. So I think fintech in its proper form is an efficiency gain. It's certainly a cost gain, And in the case of China, it's a reallocation of resources gain.
Why do you think the State Council or China's cabinet has released a series of draconian regulations to crack down upon online financial crimes?
Well, you know, when you look at the regulations, I wouldn't call them draconian. I would call them basically sensible, because, you know, if you're showing up to cheat people's money, and if your objective from day one is fraud, well, then that should be draconian for sure, right? You shouldn't be in this industry. You shouldn't be allowed to play. I think what's been set up over the last year are a very basic set of principles that says internet finance has to live up to what it's supposed to be, right? So anything that's done has to be transparent. The participants on a platform need to know what they're buying. The data that's occurred on this platform needs to be shared with the regulators on a consistent basis. The risk that's occurred on this platform also needs to be known to the market and posted for all to see. The idea is that internet finance, like the internet in general, gives us a much more transparent world, a better world to make decisions, a better world in this case for people to manage their finances. And I think if you look at the regulation, it said, number one, you can't cheat. Number two, you shouldn't do anything that's going to blow yourself up and mislead the public. And number three, you have to be extremely transparent. And so what we're actually seeing forming in China now on the back of this very massive buildup, right? I mean, we're talking about internet finance in China being 3 to 10 times the size of the US already, is creating a foundation that is going to be much more transparent than anything China has today. Platforms like ourselves, this time next year, when I think all the regulations are fully in effect, will have to report on a monthly basis any risk that's occurred. It has to be transparent for everyone to see. And that's not something you can do for a traditional bank today in China. So I think it's pushing the envelope. I think what's come out, for those who wanted to play against the rules, they're dead. Right? That's draconian, I guess you could say, but I think it's necessary. And I think we're starting to set the foundations for something that's much bigger.
When you're talking about transparency, what do you think of the risks of violating privacy? For example, vulnerability concerning release of the information in the age of big data, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence.
Well, the fact is that anything that you and I have ever done on a phone, in any form of modern device, is recorded somewhere, and it's stored somewhere in the cloud. The truth is that Google, Facebook, Apple, and a number of firms all over the world store this data, and it is there. Every email, if it was on a Microsoft piece of software, it is there. It is stored, and if someone wanted to pull it out, they could. So anything you've ever said or done is basically recorded in the last 5 years. I think the point is that up to now, the commercial incentive of a Microsoft or an Apple or anybody has been to protect that information. Because if they violate your trust and that becomes known, then the sacrifice of their brand is going to be huge. Having said that, if you look at the way the structure has been set up, it's kind of going back to your question on global trade a little bit, I think the discussion has to be dynamic. Because honestly, if you really look at your contract from a Facebook or a Google, anything that you've done, any picture you've posted, is actually not your property the day after you post it, it's theirs. And even though they have to keep it confidential, it's their property. So I think the dynamics of personal privacy is going to be a topic for the next 3 or 4 years, which will become much more robust. And I think in some ways, just the prevalence of enormous amounts of data will protect you to a certain degree, because there's so much, unless you've really upset somebody and they want to come find you, it's actually hard to find you because there's so much data. On the other hand, I think that the firewalls need to be much better established.
What do you think of the use of blockchain so that things like anonymity and cryptonym could be protected and our private information will not be abused?
I think it's a very good idea. I think it's an idea that's consistent with every other form of technology development we've seen roll out. What I mean by is that as things become more liquid, as things become more data-based, as they become more, move from analog onto more of a digital world, things become much more fluid. And as things become much more fluid, they become less concentrated. As things become less concentrated, there's less possibility for one entity to control the outcomes. And I think blockchain in the form of finance and data is moving in the same way that music has parsed off into many pieces. Finance is moving that way, where there isn't going to be one ledger that one person controls or one entity controls that has say on whether something happened or not. There'll be multiple places where this is maintained. It will be very difficult to change anything that's historically happened, and someone's reputation or chain of events is there for all to see if they want to put it forward. So I think you'll see in technology again and again. On the one hand, we have some developments that look like they could challenge privacy. We'll have some developments that looks like they could challenge legitimacy of an individual's rights. On the other, we see new technologies that are out in different ways. So blockchain, and increasingly people call it a distributed ledger, is going to create lots of ways where services, businesses, data can be more personalized and more fragmented in their delivery.
One of the recent articles of The Economist, the prestigious journal, says that the Chinese have been held hostage by the use of their smartphones in their e-payment. And it seems Europeans attach a lot more attention and importance to the protection of their privacy. They say in the article that China and the Chinese will have no privacy as a result of using their Alipay or the e-payment. What do you think of their concerns?
Well, there was the old famous, I think it's Latin saying that came out of Rome, that money has no smell. And I think the truth is that people who want to spend money will always find a way to spend money. If they can spend it more easily on a WePay or an have to spend it by cash, they will too. I think that the issues you're teeing up here are important issues, but I also fundamentally believe if you give them 3 or 4 years, technology will solve them. And I think concerns around privacy are legitimate. I think there will also be solutions to that. I think if we look back at the history of technology, when the telephone was first invented, actually there were many politicians that were concerned it would upset social stability because people could call people they didn't know. What would happen if you picked up the phone and there was someone you didn't know at the other end? Would that upset our social structure? I mean, this was a real concern when the phone first came out, right? And what would that do to privacy and everything else? So I think, as a society, we have to absorb new changes. We have to absorb new technologies. We have to regulate against their risks. But I don't think the pace is going to slow down. I don't think what's going to happen here is going to change. Going back to where we started, one of the debates was protectionism. There's a lot of concerns about immigration. I actually think if you really dig into the numbers, the biggest thing that's affecting all these are the outcomes of technology. And it's our ability to adjust to those outcomes which is actually going to determine how things come out.
In essence, what the One Belt and One Road initiative stands for is interconnectivity and a growing trend, dynamics in this process. So do you think multinationals such as Alibaba and Huawei will play the leading role?
It's very interesting. There's been a lot of research done recently that says what at the end of the day drives GDP growth. One of the conclusions is actually it's connection points. It is trade, it is supply chains. And what supports supply chains? It is ports, it is bridges, it is roads, right? So I think that the One Belt, One Road is actually a very good extension of new infrastructure. Now, if you take a Huawei or you take an Alipay or you take these companies, they are basically extending the concept of supply chains and point-to-point connections in a virtual world. So you can think about them as building the bridges of the future and the highways of the future. It's just not the way we thought of them traditionally as in concrete. But the more connection points that are built over these frameworks, whether it's on hardware or software or technology or mobile, the more connection points that you built traditionally, at least in the last 100 years, has been proven that is what drives growth. That's what drives wealth generation. And so yes, they will be doing it. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.